Welcome to the Dare Dream podcast. I'm Jason Yeager, and on today's episode, I interviewed Barton. Chris is a well-respected entrepreneur, best known for being one of the masterminds behind the music recognition app Shazam, that I'm sure you've probably heard of and maybe you've installed onto your phone. Shazam was created over 18 years ago, and the story of how he created Shazam is really amazing, and I share a link to an article you can read to learn more about that story below. But what you should know is that after having created Shazam, Apple later on caught interest and went on to purchase the technology for a speculated $400 million in 2017. Today, Chris inspires audiences and talks a lot about the concept of creative persistence and how that helped him get through a lot of the obstacles that he faced when building Shazam, which we touched base on the podcast. In fact, just a bit more context, when Chris initially had the idea for Shazam, which was back in 1999, he found out that after speaking to Stanford and MIT professors, that building the artificial intelligence algorithms that were required for what Chris's idea had in mind was impossible. Also, a side note, Chris's audio is not the best in this podcast, as we recorded this interview via Zoom. He was using his phone. We apologize for the slightly lower quality than usual, but nevertheless, we hope you'll get value from hearing what he has to say. And with that being said, I hope you enjoyed the podcast today, and you can get a better understanding of how Chris Barton dared to dream and built Shazam. This is Dare to Dream. So let's go back to the year 1999. You came up with the decision that you want to start your own business. Tell me a bit about what was going on in your life at that time, and what was your mindset like when you came up with the idea for Shazam and decided and told yourself, I want to pursue this and make it happen?
Really, my mindset at the inception of Shazam was that I was a graduate student at Berkeley doing my MBA, and I didn't know this going into my MBA, but I definitely realized in the very early part of my MBA that what I really wanted to do was to start a company, and the reason is that I just love the idea of creating things, and so that was really kind of my mindset. Is like I really want to kind of take my career in the direction of having kind of the ultimate creation experience, and Shazam concepts kind of came from that kind of impetus. So yeah, I really wanted to see if I could create a viable business, and I included basically a new product, a novel product, something that was compelling, delightful for people, and could kind of sustain a business on its own.
And did your mindset shift as you started to get into that more nitty-gritty work of starting your business?
Yeah, I would say it definitely never shifted. In fact, it was the kind of foundation of what really was my motivation with Shazam was that ultimately, and to this day, even as I work on my next startup, I realize that it's really important for me that what I spend all these hours working on is something that I'm excited about. I wake up every morning and I'm excited to get started and be productive on whatever it is I'm focused on. And it's always remained that kind of the idea of kind of having a concept and having a vision that is the future of something that I wanted to build and create, and what it would be, what it would look like, what it would feel like, what the experience would be like for end users, and the impact it would have on their lives. Has always been something that's really, really attractive to me, and I love the idea of spending my time on that. So that's always remained my motivation.
So the world nowadays has a lot to share about passion. You'll find a lot of people talking about passion and about how you have to find it and pursue it. Though I don't always think that advice in itself is necessarily super useful, because I find that it's quite general and it's hard to take that advice and know exactly how to apply that into your life. But what I do know is that with Shazam, it was definitely something that was extremely meaningful to you, and obviously continues to be meaningful to you, and that you're extremely passionate about. So my next question, and something I'm curious about, is what advice would you give to younger aspiring entrepreneurs who are either in college or in high school, which is really the target audience for this podcast, by the way, about passion and about finding something that aspiring entrepreneurs are passionate about, and being able to find themselves, being able to position themselves into entrepreneur work that is actually meaningful to them?
Yeah, I mean, I think ultimately alignment with your passion is something that only you can feel, only you can sense, and no one can dictate it to you. And there's no way of documenting, what would, what criteria something has to meet in order to fit with your passion. It really is, what you sense in your own heart. I can tell you that in the case of starting a company at the time that I, came up with the Shazam idea, brainstorming a few different ideas, and one of them was one that actually probably, in fact, almost definitely could have been a very viable business. There was a company that was created, and that's a very successful company that succeeded in that area, and which was one of the ideas I had was to just simply sell contact lenses and other vision products on a website, so it was a viable business idea. But I definitely noticed that my feeling was that I was not very excited about it. I couldn't fathom the idea of waking up every morning and just building a great way to buy contact lenses on the internet. And so, it was a perfect example of how an inadequate passion is something that just resonated with me. And so I decided not to pursue it. So I think that, ultimately it's thinking through, for each entrepreneur, it's thinking through, how do they want to impact the world? What are the things that excite them? And then kind of trying to narrow in on ideas that somehow relate to that general direction of thinking. And it could be that there's certain industries they're interested in. It could be there's certain types of people they want to work with. It could be certain types of technologies, or maybe even they want to avoid technology and do something in consumer retail or consumer products. There's so many questions that need to be answered by the individual. And it's really up to them to think it through, what they're passionate about, and then to kind of, constantly keep themselves in check. Are the ideas they're thinking about, and are the ideas they're thinking of pursuing, some things that really they're passionate about?
I definitely agree with that. And the way I see it, a lot of entrepreneurs nowadays are going to face that decision where they have to decide what project they're going to devote their time and energy on. And in making that decision, I think it's important that every entrepreneur, and I know it sounds simple, chooses to focus on something that is actually meaningful to them, that they're actually passionate about. And their decision isn't controlled by short-term thinking in particular, that tends to get you making decisions that, though in the short run might make you feel good, in the long run don't really make you feel like you lived up to what you were truly meant to do. Anyways, I want to go briefly back to what we were talking about earlier and jump back into that mindset aspect of starting your business and actually get advice from you on that. So share with me, if you will, what would you recommend an entrepreneur really focus on and thinks about when starting up their business? And what advice would you give to that entrepreneur who's looking to find some kind of co-founder they can work with who can help them bolster their idea? And talk to us a bit about that, if you will.
Finding a co-founder. I think, I think the very beginning steps, the reality is finding a co-founder may or may not be one of the first steps, because some people choose to start companies as the sole co-founder. But if finding a co-founder is one that the entrepreneur decides is one that they want to do, and I did that. I did start Shazam with 3 other co-founders. Then I do think that one's, clearly it's critical to find the right co-founders, because you can't make a mistake, or you really want to avoid making mistakes in that. And so, the approach that I took is that I really thought about, well, what's important to me in co-founders, and it was key qualities such as their, high integrity, a real passion to create a startup that I've shared with me, and an ability to really get along, and most importantly, that they had strong talents that were complementary to me. So, each co-founder kind of was really good at different things that could contribute to the overall outcome of the startup. I think you can't be underemphasized just how important it is to pick those right people, and to get it right. I think that simply just takes time and dedication and thoughtfulness as you think it through the different people. And clearly, some of the most ideal people could be people that you've gotten to know pretty well through working with them or studying with them. But also, you might be out there searching for someone that has specific talents. And in that case, you have to just try to be a good judge of whether they could be a great co-founder. Some of the other early steps in the startup, I think, are thinking through really fleshing out your idea, trying to put it to your own early tests to see if you think it could be viable, and thinking through the way it could play out. Could it become a real business, or is it just a feature? What is the business model going to look like? And are you solving some real problems? What are you going to do that's different than what's out there? and how big is the market for what you're doing. If it's a small market, that can make building a business challenging. So it's kind of really applying some of those rigorous ways of thinking to make sure that you're hopefully honing in on something that has the opportunity to be a significant business.
Definitely agree with that. I think slowly as entrepreneurs start to, get into that nitty-gritty business of startups, they're going to start to face a lot of challenges and obstacles. And I think one thing is for sure is that your journey with Shazam is nothing but a massive obstacle that you've had to get on over. I mean, it's clear from the research I did about Shazam. It was just you started it way before its time, and you had all these problems and difficulties you had to get around. I think that really brings the question of how do you build persistence? How do you build persistence to be able to get over those obstacles and, keep pushing yourself? Because that really is one of the most important entrepreneurship qualities. I'd love to get your advice on that and really just dive into what your perspective is on that about persistence for an entrepreneur then.
Yeah, I mean, clearly, I think there's almost nothing more important than persistence. Obviously, there's many things that are important, and being thoughtful and coming up with novel concepts and being passionate. They're all important, but without the persistence, you'll never be able to have the follow through to kind of get through, to get a startup, have momentum and have a chance of success. So persistence, I think, comes partly from a natural quality. I think that some individuals have, and some people may have less of it. I'm not sure, I'm not sure if someone can just become persistent. I think it's more likely that the successful entrepreneurs just were instinctively, inherently highly persistent people. So I think it's a good way of assessing whether you're really kind of cut up the cloth of an entrepreneur if you kind of naturally have that type of persistence, because I really do believe that it's something that's kind of it's sort of built into some people, and there's a lot of people that have very high levels of persistence. Clearly, that's how they got to where they are, including I'm sure a lot of the students that are listening to this podcast. So what I think is really an interesting approach, or an interesting angle of looking at persistence, is something that I call creative persistence. Creative persistence is, just to give an example, it's not just simply, let's say that you're trying to accomplish something. For example, like in the case of Shazam, one of the things we had to accomplish was that we wanted to build a vast database of fingerprints of all music. And so persistence is, that was a very hard thing to achieve, and especially as a startup with limited resources. And just persistence would be just saying, I'm not going to give up on that. I'm just going to keep on pounding on the door and try to figure out how to knock down whatever the hurdles are to accomplish that. But creative persistence is when you basically really stand back and try to think with a clean slate, and as they say, or out of the box thinking. Creatively, how can you kind of solve that problem? How can you conquer that hurdle? And trying to come up with really creative, unique approaches as a way of solving the problem. And that's what I call creative persistence. So in the example of the music database, we ended up approaching a company that was basically the largest warehouse of CDs in the UK at the time, which was the first market we launched in the UK. And we thought, well, how are we going to get hold of all these CDs? That we can't buy one copy of every CD, because that would just cost so much money. And so we partnered with them to basically work together to kind of create this sort of database of that housed all the information around artists and albums and all the metadata that described all the music, song names, and so on. And we co-created it with them, and something that they would benefit from as well. One of the things that we created was the fingerprint database that allowed us to identify songs. And by co-creating it with them, and convincing them that this co-creation would benefit them as well, that's how we solved that problem. And we're able to basically co-locate on their warehouse sites and have individuals creating this database on site without actually having to really purchase one of every single CD. And that came out of this kind of creative thinking combined with persistence. So I think that is what I think is this creative persistence concept. I think is very, very core and central to the type of successful thinking that an entrepreneur needs to be successful. And there'd be many examples that a lot of the most successful companies that we know of today, companies like Google and PayPal and Facebook and so on, of that creative persistence and how it helps solve problems and overcome hurdles, and those, especially in the early days, but throughout the existence of the companies.
Yeah, that's really fascinating. And I love that concept of creative persistence because any entrepreneur you look at, you're almost always going to find that quality of persistence within them, because it's that quality persistence that allows you to attain large success. I mean, without persistence, you really can't attain any kind of success, right? Because it's the quality of not giving up. It's the quality of continuing to better yourself and chip away at things no matter how bad things are or what you're experiencing. That is what makes you so strong as an entrepreneur. And it's that strong level of persistence that enables you to become successful at the end of the day. Anyways, there's obviously a lot more character traits that I'd love to talk to you about in this podcast. But one of the things I do want to shift the conversation to is talking a bit more about technology, and especially about how that's evolving right now. I don't know all too well how tech-savvy entrepreneurs who are listening to this podcast are, but nevertheless, I do want to shift the conversation to that because I think there's a lot to be aware of, especially with how technology is evolving right now, and especially with AI and with machine learning tied to that. But I want to ask you this question: what important areas do you think that entrepreneurs should really come to understand and really research and read about that you think are going to be extremely important in the future, and from a technological standpoint are going to be things that most entrepreneurs just have to know about, have to read about, and at least to be prepared and to be successful in this evolving business world? What would you say those are?
Honestly, that's a very hard question to answer, and I do get asked that sometimes. But the reality is there's so many things out there that I don't think there's one or two or three or even 10 things that are the most important things for people to focus on. Obviously, some of the things I'm most excited about that I think are going to be revolutionary include machine learning, artificial intelligence. And that's the direction I'm going. But honestly, I think for some entrepreneurs, as I said, they might be interested in things that aren't even related to technology. Maybe they want to solve a problem that all pet owners have, and it's something to do with creating new experiences for pet owners that may not involve technology at all, or very little technology. So I think that I don't think there's a specific set of things. I think it's more about what I like is to identify, what resonates with me in terms of what I'm excited about and what are the trends and technologies because I'm interested in technology, things that I'm most excited about. And then I just like to really hyper focus on becoming an expert at solving those problems. And so actually, as a result, I end up knowing very well the area that I'm interested in, but not very well at all many of the parallel areas. So I don't have actually a very strong awareness and knowledge of what many other trends are in technology and startups, if they're even just like a few centimeters away from what I'm doing, because I just tend to stay so laser focused on how to solve my specific problems to create the best experience, and putting all my effort into that. So, for example, investors and venture capitalists and angel investors and so on, they tend to have a very good breadth of what the trends are and what's exciting and what are the new up and coming opportunities that are available to entrepreneurs. But I would say I'm weak in that area because of my more entrepreneurial approach of being so focused.
Awesome. Very interesting. And I guess I want to wrap things up with a last question here, just because I'm curious to hear about this. What would you say are 3 things you would do differently within your startup journey of starting up Shazam? Any 3 things that come to mind?
Yeah, so there's no question that thinking through thinking through how to solve the early economics of a startup, and which basically means bringing revenues in earlier and also thinking how to spend money less earlier. Those 2 things are so core, I think, to to the success of a startup, because those are the ways that the startup is able to remain alive financially. And Shazam ultimately, it was a very capital intensive business because of the types of technologies that were available at that time. And we did do some things right around finding early revenues, but I would have done them even earlier. I would have focused even earlier on things that building products that we could immediately start monetizing. For example, we built a B2B business where we monitored radio stations and sold that information and licensed that technology for the purposes of monitoring and creating reports around radio station airplay. And it turned out that was a business that could bring in some revenue early on and therefore pay the bills. And I think thinking about those types of things, even if they're not necessarily your number one objective and goal for the company, they can be really foundational to enabling the company to sort of have the oxygen that allow it to breathe. In other words, money to spend on development. The great example I always think of is that Google, in its early days, powered Yahoo search, and as a result got paid by Yahoo to power their search, and that's what paid the bills for those early years. And I'm pretty confident that the founders of Google, their ultimate dream was not to power Yahoo search, but they did make that a priority, and it became a way that early revenue became a way to enable the company to continue thriving and growing and investing in those early days. So that was probably my biggest learning by far, and one that I would suggest every entrepreneur think carefully about to make sure they can survive through those early years, because everything takes longer than you think to realize, and so you need that capital influx of revenue to help you do that. That's the biggest one. I think the other ones are I'm greatly appreciative of the quality, amazing people that contributed to Shazam, my co-founders and the early employees. I think we really got some. We're lucky enough to have a great initial team and great people involved, and I really, when I look back, I think if we hadn't done that, we would have certainly failed, and so that another learning is just recognizing just how important that was, and I'm feeling so grateful that we really got that right in the early days. So that's probably the second biggest learning of how that I would pass along to entrepreneurs, is making sure that that early team, every single first hire, co-founder, and an investor, that you just think very carefully, who they're going to be, and making sure you pick the right people.
Great. Thank you for sharing that, Chris. Thank you. Really appreciate your time. I am very happy to have you on the podcast, and I look forward to seeing everything you're going to be doing next from your entrepreneur journey as it continues.
Well, thank you. Thank you for having me. I enjoyed it.
Thanks for tuning into this episode of the Dare to Dream podcast. The Dare to Dream podcast is part of Dare to Dream Media that is brought to you by Shivansh Mehta and me, Jason Yeager. With Dare to Dream Media, we aim to provide quality content to young, ambitious entrepreneurs, innovators, and individuals that have a vision for something they want to create in the world and want to know what it takes to achieve it. We share content in the form of podcasts, short videos, and blogs that you can stay up to date with, all on our Instagram account page at daretodream_media. Thank you.